The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Welcome to the Media Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Veritone One. We are knee-deep in this series of discussions on a big question that we're all facing. The question is, what's a podcast? And I have half these conversations and I feel like the response is, why are we even talking about this? Like, this is a nothing issue. And then sometimes I'm reminded as we get a little deeper into the exchange that it's actually really important, particularly for those of us that work in this business, whether or not we define ourselves as podcasters or people that work specifically in the podcast industry. Labels do matter, and there's economic implications, there's cultural implications. And so we're really doing a deep dive on this show, trying to make it ground zero for an industry conversation that needs to be had about who are we and what is it that we all really meant when we started rallying around this idea of podcasting. And as the world changes, as there's consolidation and movement in how consumption happens, adding video as part and parcel of it, what are we trying to hang on to here? And what are we ready to let go of? So as we're kind of working our way through this identity crisis as an industry, we're really trying to assemble some of the leading minds and participants who work in this field. Today, we have a wonderful new voice to the program, a gentleman named John McDermott, who is co-founder of Caloroga Shark Media, which produces over 30 podcasts in every genre, from politics to comedy to sports. Little bit of background on John before we welcome him to the program. John has really been all around this industry. He's got a background in AM radio, just as I do, but on the East Coast. He worked at Sirius XM, overseeing comedy and entertainment programming. He was EVP of programming at Cadence 13, which is a storied network within this industry. And he worked on hits like Pod Save America, as well as Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History. He's also an adjunct professor at Montclair State University, and he's a curator and host of comedy programming at Live One, which is connected to Podcast One, which is actually the network that represents this program. So all that to say, John, we're really glad to have you here participating in the discussion. Welcome to the Media Roundtable.
So I'm glad that you invited me on here today so people can see that I'm not a raving lunatic and we can have a nuanced conversation without someone reading my words and thinking I'm yelling and screaming.
Well, okay, so let's start there. I'm gonna ask that you do a little bit of confession. What are some of those curveballs that you've been throwing at the industry? What are some of the recent ones that you feel like are shaking things up a little bit?
So one of them recently is I threw out a notion, should we push the YouTubers, and Nick Hilton actually just wrote a wonderful piece I saw on Substack this week about when we get into the video podcasting of it, are these people really YouTubers and should we just call them YouTubers? I had floated, should we call them vodcasters and keep podcasting for the audio podcast? which gets into our larger topic of what even is a podcast. This thing that we're doing right now seems to me to be a podcast. However, there's a video component to it. Had you invited me in 19, the emails would have been, hey, what are we going to be in the same city? Can you come by the studio? Sure. The pandemic came along. It took us all a week and we figured out how to do things remotely. Part of the remote had video. And then people realized, oh, why don't we capture the video and put it out? And we've seen the situation evolve. My concern is as more and more people pivot to video, all in caps, what will happen to audio podcasting or traditional podcasting? And I feel like, and Hilton wrote about this, are you trying to keep up with Mr. Beast? And can you keep up with Mr. Beast? And most of us can't. And if we allow the external media to define podcasting as some sort of fancy video shoot where we've got a couch and some potted plants, and our guest is a famous political person, if that is what the media determines podcasting is, are we going to look like horse and buggy purveyors where, I quote, only do an audio podcast? And I want to save that and not have it turn into that. So I don't want to be the anti-video guy. I'm not the anti-video guy. I just want to stick up for, hey, there's nothing wrong with heading down to the basement and talking about Star Trek with your friends or whatever we're doing. I just want to hold the line on maybe we ought to hold on to the word podcasting and let this new thing be called something else.
So I guess the complicated piece of this is that how can you hold the line when so much of it is exactly what we're doing here? It's cheap to throw it on, whether it's Zoom or Riverside or whatever. And then you've got this additional distribution opportunity to extend the audio conversation. Where is the line between in this case, if we were to go with vodcasts versus podcasts, when does it stop being a podcast? Is it a podcast as soon as you have a video component?
So I know this isn't the right answer that you're looking for.
I forget what
I
I'm looking for ideas here, man, because we're just trying to figure this thing out.
I don't know. Like I said, this feels like a podcast, even though we're looking at each other and people are going to be able to watch this. Maybe because it's casual and we're not on a set and it feels old schooly. Part of what I worry about is the arms race of, is what we're doing right now okay forever? Is it okay for 2 more years, 5 more years, 6 more months? Are the other podcasts going to up their video component and then we'll look basement-y and cheap and somehow lesser? And does the video then actually hurt the perception of a perfectly fine show? These are all the things I don't have the answer for.
Well, and that's exactly why we're having the conversation, right? Because it's my view that we need to take all of this mess and do the best we can to clean it up in a way that we can operate within and around, but it ain't going to be perfect. I mean, that is for sure. We have had voices come on and say, if it ain't got an RSS, it's not a podcast. It sounds like you're of the mind that it's either an audio product or it's a video product. But then we get into the nuance of where do you cut that line, right? I think there's a common chorus in the industry that says, okay, there can be a video component. Like, it's very hard to stay purist on audio only and really expect that business to thrive now that it's so easy to slap the visual component on, especially for a program like this, which seems to be dominant right now that the kind of high production budgets have dried up. You don't have the same thing that you had 5+ years ago when the charts were dominated by like really highly produced Wondery series, or for so long it was NPR, right? Like the chat show seems to be ruling, and that's very cheap to produce, right? So if you only allow audio, you start to box yourself into a very narrow lane, and you may miss out on otherwise interested listeners who just happen to prefer something like YouTube for where they're going to access it, right? So this is hard stuff. And I guess I want to go back a little bit into your career now. And I want to understand the relationship you've had with the spoken word and what it is that you feel is different, because I think a lot of people are like, whatever, like, I grew up with TikTok and Instagram, and this is the world now. They never had a radio, right? They just skipped it. And so I think a lot of people don't really stop to acknowledge what was made possible from a programming standpoint and from a product standpoint when you actually force the constraint of not having use of video. So can you talk a little bit about just your relationship professionally with audio only content?
Sure. So they taught us growing up in programmer school the art of the spoken word and the storytelling aspects, and we can tell this wonderful science fiction story without having to spend the budget on it. I worked in at WR New York for 10 years, doing all sorts of shades of talk programming. I produced Dr. Joy Brown, which was, I'll simplify, a love phones type show. But as the assistant PD, I was the fill-in producer on everyone else. So my job was either get someone to produce it or produce it yourself. And I would do extended runs of producing Bob Grant, maybe 5 minutes past his heyday, but doing political show in the Clinton years and understanding the art of that and the sequencing of callers and how do you create a story here. And I remember one day working with Grant. And I said to him, Bob, I can't do this Clinton stuff anymore. I just can't do it today. And he looked me in the eye and he said, all right. And if somebody mentions Clinton to me, I'll say, get off my phone, which was his catchphrase. And then I realized, oh, this is an act you can turn on and off. Okay, now I know how to produce you. Now I know how to sequence the callers and tee people up for the entertainment aspect of it. That was just a wonderful place, WR, because of all the different shades of a money show, a doctor show, produced a Rambling with Gambling for a stint. That was fantastic. You mentioned before that I teach a college class, and this ties to our theme. Week 1 in my introduction to radio class, and I hope no future students are listening, I asked them the question, what is radio? And I do this whole thing and we go back and forth and I drag this out as long as I can week 1. What is radio? They give me all kind of answers. And then I take out my phone and I tell them I'm listening to Z100 on this phone. Is this radio? Well, yes and no, it is and it isn't because it's digital and there's royalty rights and it's not all that. And then I tie it into television and I get them to agree what TV is. And then I tell them I'm watching Netflix and they agree on that. And then I show them my phone and I tell them I go outside and I watch Netflix. Am I watching TV? And I do this whole thing. And I finally come around. The big reveal is I don't care. I make content. And that's kind of where I am right now. And I know I'm answering the video question 3 ways to Sunday. I kind of don't care. You talked about the people who are arguing it has to have an RSS feed. Joe Rogan was a really successful podcast. Then he went to Spotify and didn't have an RSS feed. And boy, you're going to try and convince me that Spotify era Joe Rogan wasn't a podcast. That was a podcast, my friends. And now it's got an RSS feed again. So it's back to being a podcast, but also has a video component. All this stuff is really crazy. So fast forward, I find myself at Cadence 13. They were putting together the company, and I came in as, the guy with a couple gray hairs that knew a few things and knew how to teach the younger producers, here's how you stay out of trouble, guys. Don't use Taylor Swift's new song as your open music. That's going to be a problem. Here's why. And there, learning podcasting at the beginning of the second wave. I know the 2007 crowd looks down on us 2015ers, but during 2015 was involved with the launch of Pod Save America. I was writing the commercial, cleaning up the commercial copy for them that they voiced. We had, like you said, we had Malcolm's company for a little bit and was involved in the behind the scenes there. I'm not saying I created those shows. I'm not saying I was involved with the programming of that, but I was attached to those shows. And then we had the in-house shows that we created. And, you learn this is a new medium and you unlearn everything you learned. When I got to satellite radio, I unlearned everything I had from broadcast radio. Now, when you get to podcasting, instead of teasing 15 minutes from now, Tom Cruise and President Obama are going to reveal to us that aliens are real. You don't do that. You make that your first sentence. Joining me as President Obama with Tom Cruise. Guys, are aliens real? And get right to it. So it's just been fun watching this evolve. And I guess we're evolving again, right?
Yeah, it certainly seems so. So in your view, is a podcast radio?
You're doing what I do. Is a podcast radio? No, because we don't have a transmitter in a swamp broadcasting it. It's an on-demand audio program.
I have wondered if the industry would do well to just say screw it and call all this stuff radio, but I don't think it's going to take. I think that ship has sailed. But so even though you see value in the distinction between a video based program and an audio based program, it also seems like you don't feel like the stakes are very high. And I guess I'll just give you some arguments and let you respond to them about why it may be higher than we think. One reason is, let's just start with the money. Investment goes in and out of this industry based on the size of the industry and the growth trajectory. Now, you saw a lot of money pouring in during the pandemic, and then you saw all of a sudden that a lot of that money dried up, right? Well, the forecasts on the business, it was like, we're going to 2 million. And then I saw projections that in 2023 or 4, we were going to be at 4 million, or I'm sorry, billion. billion domestic revenue through advertising. But then all of a sudden they pulled back and they're like, yeah, we're just going to cruise at 2 for a while. Like, stick around. We'll let you know. When that happens, people's bullishness on the channel goes away, and there's actually less funding for a lot of the shows that we appreciate. I think it's one of the reasons that you don't see as much investigative journalism, right? And so much of this just talk product being pushed out because it's cheaper to manufacture. So it has an impact on investment. I think if you're producing a show, if you're a creator, if you're on the publishing side, it has a lot to do with budgets, because brands need to know how they have a budget, the larger they are, and they allocate that across different channels. And podcasting for a long time has just been like a coin toss on where you pull it out of. Are we competing in the influencer bucket with their Instagram buys? Is it part of the radio bucket? Is there a podcasting bucket? Is there a YouTube creator bucket and a podcasting bucket? But all of these things do have implications on the money that is allocated to support the content that's being created. Further, you've got a pretty robust industry that I think it tapped a cultural vein in podcasting. I don't think we've really seen, at least in my lifetime, I don't think we've ever seen a media channel generate as much just enthusiasm in the culture. I mean, I like to use SNL as a bellwether, and you can chart, how many sketches they've done about podcasting, right? Talking to Dan Franks, the founder of Podcast Movement, his origin in this business was that he was so passionate. He would just travel around doing meetups and setting up meetups for people that were passionate about podcasting. Now, you might say that about, well, sure, there's Comic-Con, there's Star Wars and Star Trek conventions, right? But never about the media type. Never that someone is so enthralled with the channel of distribution that they want to get together and share what they love about it. And so I think the cultural impact is profound. And if we take the teeth out of what that means to people, there may be something underneath that it represents that goes away with that as it kind of gets paved over and thrown into the sea of, well, anybody creates anything and just slaps it online.
Yeah, you talked about the money, and I think that's one of the concerns I have with the video stuff is in the industry, a lot of us have worked at companies where the boss gets excited about something and there's a new initiative, right? We're going all in on video, so we hire a video team, let's get a sets, and our stuff has to look great. My concern, and I threw out the word July, and we'll see if I'm right or wrong, is that July is going to come and the boss types are going to look at the budgets and whatever income is coming in from YouTube. And I worry about the layoffs. I worry about the video teams getting laid off. I worry, do the companies who are going all in on this, are they going to stay the course? Let me say the phrase Facebook Live to everybody. I remember that was a thing. And did that not make sense?
They have a podcasting arm as well. Isn't Meta big in podcasting? Oh, that got canceled after a couple of months.
But on paper, as bosses, doesn't that make sense? Yeah, let's go all in on Facebook Live, the algorithm, and people can comment and all the things we're saying now. And then 6 months later, it was like, oh yeah, that's over, and we moved on to the next thing. Again, I'm not stupid. I get the YouTube algorithm. I'm not saying don't do video. I am saying I worry about the budgets. I worry about the boss looking at the numbers, going, do we really need this?
Well, and I think that's a meaningful consideration, right? You've got a couple liabilities when you switch over and have an over dependence on the video. And I think what you're saying is kind of a subset of that is if it changes your cost structure materially, you're now creating an exposure that may be a bubble. And so if we're talking about throwing on the Zoom and just pumping through the same feed as you would otherwise, why not, right? I think we're both in the kind of why not camp on that, right? But yeah, if you're paying people to like the set, that's an exposure. And at some point there will be accountability on that. It's one of the major challenges. The other challenge is that, well, a couple other challenges. One, you have an over reliance on platforms, whereas with the RSS, you really, you knew that if somebody changed an algorithm or a platform went belly up or whatever, there were still multiple other places that you could be found. But if you're all in on YouTube, or you're all in on Spotify, we have seen real-time shifts in the whims of the executives that all of a sudden, like there's an election and suddenly content is permissible that wasn't before. But what happens when it changes hands again, right? Do we just pull the rug out from under people that were really relying on that as their main source of income for their livelihood? That could have implications too. Or even just, what do the algorithms like and favor, and how do they calibrate that? So when you have an overdependence on a platform, I do think there's a liability in that kind of goes against the central thesis of podcasting, which is that anybody can do it from anywhere and it's available to all. The democratization. When you got two players that are really dominating the consumption and the distribution, it may feel that way, but it's not quite that way.
I've heard a lot recently about programming towards the algorithm, right? And that's a slippery slope. I do teach in all formats, play the hits, but here on this show, you have the hits that you play, which are different than us perhaps chasing even greater numbers, but getting off topic because we're talking about, whatever the thing that will please the algorithm gods on this particular day.
Right.
That's not a good thing. I always bring up, if you want to go down the basement and talk about Star Trek, that's awesome. Do that. But understand you're not going to beat out Joe Rogan talking to your friends about Star Trek in the basement. You're just not. I think one of the things that's been great about podcasting is we can do all these slivers of life and these microcasts, and not everything has to be 1 million downloads. And you would hope that you don't get away from that trying to keep up with the Joneses on YouTube.
You ever heard the quote that says, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half. And that is attributed to John Wanamaker. He died in 1922. Here we are in 2025. And everybody I know that works in advertising is still struggling with the same problem. All of the robots, all of the AI, all of the fragmentation, it has probably not gotten easier than it was 100 years ago. And in fact, it may be getting harder by the day. And as technology continues to exponentially advance, it doesn't make it any easier. So you really need solutions and strategies, but you also need the right tools. At Oxford Road, we work with a number of different tools, depending on the needs of our partners. But frankly, when we're in a position to advise on which tools to use, which is often, we very oftentimes guide people to go to Claritas. Claritas is very much the gold standard. One of the things that's amazing about Claritas is that not only are they helpful in ad performance and attribution across audio, but they actually, their solutions are available across a multitude of media channels. A lot of times companies that will be omni-channel in their attribution systems, they don't care about audio, but it's interesting. Claritas is the exception to that rule. They actually put a lot of energy into audio, and that's why they are sponsors of this program and have been multi-year partners of this agency, because they're really important in helping us get to the truth. I've been doing this for 20 years. The biggest challenge that persistently comes up in conversations with advertisers always starts with attribution. And so you need a good tool. Let me tell you a few of the features with Claritas. Audience optimization helps you find and engage your most responsive customers using real-time data. That's really the main point, is to know how to dial in your spend to make sure you maximize impact. But you can't do that if you don't have the instrumentation. Creative optimization is a feature that is increasingly possible in the world of attribution, and Claritas is very much leading the way in that. And they have AI-powered attribution, which even though our AI world is making things more confusing, it's also part of the solution that Claritas uses to give you what you need. So look, if you want an attribution tool that can help you across your total marketing funnel, I strongly recommend you take a minute, go to Claritas.com. That's spelled Claritas.com. Schedule a demo. The demo's free. The product costs money, but it won't cost you anything to check it out. So go right now, do a little bit less guessing in your advertising campaign and a little more time spent optimizing. Well, and so going back into your experience, that ability, I mean, I think that was one of the fundamental shifts for me was the ability to assemble a tribe around an affinity that terrestrial radio could never allow for, right? I mean, working in the business, I saw that there were only so many discussion topics because they had to play the hits because they were just in competition with the signals that reached people in that area. So everybody's fighting over the most popular thing, the most popular songs, the most popular topics. And if you wanted to have a topical show, whether it was technology or law or business, finance, you generally got to program that on the weekend and maybe let them do a cameo during the week, right? Because you just couldn't be competitive. Whereas podcasting, I think that was a big part of the renaissance. What do you feel when you started transitioning from the traditional media to the renaissance in podcasting? What were the kind of material benefits to the listener that you saw?
I think that you can have these more intimate commercials. Again, you're not forward conversations. You're not forward teasing. You're not doing abrupt clock breaks. We can, I like sales. I'm here to sell commercials when I
Mhm,
make things. Please, everyone understand that. I
mhm.
like sponsors. Please sponsor all our things. But we can take the break at the right time and not just because it's 17 minutes past the hour and we've got to do some quarter hour maintenance here. And there's a whole strategy to when you take your breaks in talk radio. You get away from that. How long is the show? I don't know. It's as long as it is. I'll teach my students. I'll ask them to hand in a 20-minute project, and I explain to them by 20 minutes, I mean, I don't know, 18 is 20, 22 is 20, 29 is not 20. You'll know it when you feel it. And just having all that freedom to speak about things. There's the uncensored aspect. Now, I'm a big believer not to curse for curse sake. I do think it's more entertaining to use words like I always quote The Rock. You can call somebody a jabroni is a lot funnier than calling them something else. But you do have the uncensored language, the uncensored thoughts. You're not up against a clock for the most part. And it was just very, very freeing. And again, we can do all these little niche casts based upon a topic. We can have a conversation about podcasting. You can't do that on an FM stick.
No, you certainly cannot, right? So that really created I think what I would call the movement behind podcasting, right? And there were always radio enthusiasts. I was one of them. That's why I got into the business because I got stuck in LA traffic and got sick of hearing the same songs. And then I'm like, oh, the conversations are more interesting in certain cases, but just limited. And then it was like the lid came off with this thing when the internet met radio. All of a sudden we were able to do the impossible. Do you think that some of the changes going on in the industry are now becoming more limiting? So, for example, video. Are you actually more limited with it than without?
I do think that there is the potential for things that aren't as professionally shot as other things being seen as lesser. And so I'll tie this whole thing together we've been talking about back to the vodcasting, back to what is a podcast, back to should I shoot video. There was an announcement this week that Michelle Obama is starting. And depending on where you read it, I think the New York Times called it a video podcast. Most other outlets called it a podcast. So if Joe Public starts to think a podcast is Michelle Obama on a fancy set that's properly lit and she has proper makeup on and A-level guests, is what you and I are doing right now somehow lesser. And I worry about the public perception of whatever this is not being a podcast, because a podcast is Michelle Obama interviewing A-listers. And then what happens to whatever this is?
We become AM radio.
But okay, great. You know what? You might have just given me my next 3 Substacks. Do we want to be AM radio? Do we deserve to be AM radio? I don't think so. So let's try and hold on to the word podcasting and call a YouTube show a YouTube show.
So you don't want to just call them shows. You actually want to preserve podcasts. You just don't want to get sucked in to the pressure that we have to chase the visual.
Yes.
Okay.
I fear everyone's going to run off to video land and the layoffs are going to come. And I don't want what we're doing right now to be lesser. Is there a video component right now? Sure. Like you said, me, you, I don't know how many producers you have. Somebody's going to clean this up, heads and tails, publish, go. That makes sense to me from a budget standpoint. But keeping up with the Joneses, I think, is dangerous.
Yeah, as soon as you've got incremental head count to service the visual piece, I think that's an interesting exposure that you underscore. The other piece of it is when you're playing to the camera and when it's led by the visual, when it really matters how you look, for whether or not, like, now you're in another uh, solar system as far as I'm concerned, because like, and we had this conversation with Ira Glass. It's like, when you see the radio host that you've been listening to for the first time, you're always disappointed because it's not the image you had in your head, right? And it's so interesting because I am bullish on AI. I think that it has, we have to accept it. We have to make peace with it, but we have to be deliberate about when do we need to decide that a situation requires something less efficient than AI, even though AI can do it. Things like what we do, things that are about trust and human connection. If AI is doing my endorsements, whether it's a vodcast or whatever, all of a sudden you killed the golden goose, which is that trust, that vulnerability, that risk that somebody's taking with their own reputation to say, I believe in this thing and I think you should too, on behalf of a brand. That's the thing that puts us in another stratosphere, right? It's just different. And so I don't want to see that change for the sake of the business. So, here's the good news for you. I think there is some general alignment around what you're thinking, and I think that most people are saying, yeah, you can't force out the video. You don't want to try to have a lane. Now, my concern is that we pave over the avenue. Like, if you're looking, you may be able to see behind me the 405 freeway, right? And I can count 4 or 5 lanes on there. One of those lanes should be audio only, but it can't be the whole freeway,
Okay, I
right?
like it.
You
I
know,
like it.
I think that needs to be a piece of it here, because there's some content that is truly diminished. And getting back to the thing about AI is that AI will be able to know you and give you a customized visualization of the thing that you're talking about that matches you and knows you really well. I still don't think it'll ever catch up with the movie that your brain can concoct just from the sound, right? And when you have to see it, I think I think it's a different art. I think it's a different canvas if the visual is required. And I'm finding a lot of consensus around that.
I've struggled. I put out a podcast 7 days a week called Daily Comedy News. It's me telling you what's happening in stand up comedy for 10, 12 minutes a day. And I've really struggled with, okay, what's the video version of this? I have been self describing as I'm somewhere between Troll and George Clooney. I'll let you pick where I am on the scale. There are people who are more handsome than me. There are definitely people who are younger than me. There are definitely people who are sexier than me. And is a great version of Daily Comedy News podcast, me, where I am right now in front of my orange wall and my fake window sticker. Is that a good video? It's not. And I am
Oh, you sell
55
yourself short. I think you look great.
and I am 55 years old. So what would be a good version? Would an AI assist who, if I tell a story about Bill Burr and I could grab an image of Bill Burr, and again, are we all properly sourcing these images that we're using in our videos? Do I want to kick that can? Probably not. People are going to get very upset. So what would the images be? Would an AI cartoon avatar of me be better than actual me? I think maybe, but that tech's not all the way there yet. So these are the things I struggle with in terms of, okay, let's make a video. What should we make? Now you want to give me infinite budget and I'll sit on a late night style set with proper lighting and proper makeup and a suit and a proper haircut. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So what else is lost in some of the changes that you're seeing in the marketplace? I don't want to stay all doomsday, but I think it's important that we call it out. Is the world that you work in, that we work in, continues to evolve. Like, I think we know a lot of the benefits and those are worth mentioning too, but what's going away in addition to just taking on the risk of layoffs?
I think the industry is actually in a great space right now. Was it 16 months ago that podcasting was dead for whatever reason it was decided? Maybe it was what you mentioned when the budgets were pulled back. Then we had this summer, was the podcasting election and podcasting
Mm.
was great again. Spotify for video, or Spotify creators had their moment. Then now we're all having the YouTube conversation. But whatever this is that we're making, whatever a podcast is, it's in the zeitgeist. It's healthy. I think we're in a great place. There's plenty of room for independent creators, plus or minus discovery with a capital D. We can have that conversation all day, but maybe the YouTube algorithm helps that. Maybe it doesn't. But I think we're in a great spot.
So when you think about the push toward video, the other implication, and one of the great things is that with video, you get better promotion. you get the ability to do sampling in ways that you really didn't get to do with audio. And you know this. You know how hard it has been to grow an audience when iTunes was dominating. You really couldn't just expose a listener to three other things that they might like and have that be able to hook them with the visual, right? So the video piece has really been able, I think, to facilitate expansion of the business in many ways. And so that's a good thing. Is there a flip side to that?
If we all head over to video and consume on video apps, specifically YouTube, we're really talking about YouTube here, right? We're not all going to Rumble, and I don't know how well or not
Well,
Spotify for video is doing.
we're going to be talking about Spotify, so we should get into that too.
Do the audio apps get left behind? Is Apple still invested in this or not? I
Were they
can't
ever? I
tell.
don't know. Maybe as much as they ever were, which is not enough.
So same theme, same drum I'm beating. I just don't want audio to get left behind.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to lead you toward is the consolidation of a few companies that own the distribution. Is there impact that comes from that?
Well, we've got third-party apps. They're out there. It's just a matter of how do you get
No, you
people.
don't.
I use a third-party app every day. I'm a big fan of it.
Well, but I mean, have you seen the stats on like what
Of course.
percent, right? So of course, yes, as a, there's a niche for that. There's people that want vinyl, right? But at the end of the day, like it's Google, it's Spotify, and now Apple is kind of an also ran.
Which is so weird, but yeah.
So weird, right? So like they just this whole time like they let us build and farm their land and they never cared and they never asked for a check. And then they just let other people kind of take that away. And I'm sorry that they did that because, I think there's a missed opportunity in it.
Can we talk about the YouTube 1 billion viewers for a second?
I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Okay. So this one, people didn't throw pies in my direction when I said this out loud. People actually went, oh, wait, that makes sense. So YouTube said there's 1 billion viewers of podcasts every month on their service. Great, fine. I accept the stat. That's great. Factually, there are 340 million Americans. So I'm going to concede that every single American, the babies and the elderly, are consuming podcasts every month on YouTube. That leaves another 660 million people outside the US who are consuming podcasts every month on YouTube. And it's viewers, not views, viewers. So we're in the advertising business, right? We're here to sell socks, we're here to sell meals, we're here to sell mental health services. So from that lens, do the other 660 million matter? Because they're not going to buy meal boxes. So let's start with the number 340 million. And I'm not so sure it's all the babies are listening. So let's knock the number down from 340 million to, I don't know, 250 million, 150 million. Still a really, 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 really great number. Really great number. But
Yep.
it's not a billion.
So you're not buying it.
I'm buying it. I'm just pointing out if we're here to sell meal boxes, there are 340 million Americans.
Yeah.
So at tops, the number is 340 million, and from a lens of I'm trying to sell an ad.
Yeah, but even still, like, do you actually believe that the billion is credible? Do you think that there's 5 times as many people outside the US consuming as within? And do we see any other platforms mirroring those types of stats?
Who am I to question a YouTube press release? I just, I just looked at it and went, oh, wow, that's 1 in 8 people on the planet. That's impressive. It's an impressive number, but factually, there are 340 million Americans.
Yeah. Well, but even still, I think the question I have is how do they classify these things and who is actually making those decisions, right? I mean, you have millions of podcasts, and let's say that of the 6 million in the iTunes library, 3 million of them went and put it on YouTube, but even still, I'd like to see some definitions, right? And I don't know that we've actually seen Google produce one yet. There's, let me get you to react to this. There are some who have said here that don't worry about it. Like, stop trying to cap this thing. Let it grow. Let everything be a podcast. Let, whatever they want to call a podcast, call it a podcast. And we can put limits on it later. But for now, is there a downside to that mentality?
I think it's great. I subscribe to Jimmy Buffett theory, which is be everywhere. He used to stream his concerts for free, and then when he came to your town, you couldn't wait to go see him. So anything that builds your fan base, I think, is a great thing. But just to beat my dead horse, I'd hate a year from now to meet a stranger and tell them, oh, I do a podcast about comedy every day. And they say, where do I watch it? Or they think now Kill Tony's going to Netflix. And now do I have to be on Netflix to be an A-level podcaster? Like, I just don't want to get left behind.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a big tent, and I think what the medium did really well is it gave everybody a chance. It gave them a foot in the door. And people came in with natural advantages already, right? Like Joe Rogan had a background, Adam Carolla had a following, Leo Laporte had a following, right? And from the very early days of what was commercially successful, I think that podcast has been very much helped by the people you already recognized that were there. It was like the SNL cast that you recognize from prior seasons. You're quicker to give them a laugh. You're going to give them the benefit of the doubt if the first thing doesn't work for you. But within that context, you had all these breakout stars that no one had ever heard of, and they were able to really leverage the meritocracy of it. I'm optimistic that that's going to continue to play. I think what gets hard is as the handful of meaningful distribution platforms continue to seek monetization, are they going to give preference to the people that they have a special relationship with, and it's going to make it just that much harder for the next one to break through, right? And so I do see that being a threat, and that's kind of where I was leading you with some of the consolidation questions.
Sure, 100%. Is this going to become a celebrity industry? And I struggle with that too. I wrote about this week. I looked at the iHeart Podcast Awards, and as I called it, it was the Big Name Awards. And part of me made me make what I called crinkly face. Was like, oh, really? And not that those shows are bad, but are they truly like the best in the category? If we really dug down, is maybe perhaps possibly there's a sports podcast that's even better than the one that won. And I'm not dumping on the one that won. It's perfectly fine. It's a good show, but maybe there's another one. But if you look at the awards, it went to all celebrities. However, that makes podcasting the cool party to be at. What do you do? I'm a podcaster. Oh, yeah. And you work in this showbiz thing, which maybe wasn't true 15 years ago when it was guys in their basement talking about technology. So I think that is a good thing. But to your point, the next podcasters who come around and they want to talk about Star Trek in the basement with their friends, it's going to be that much harder to compete against Michelle Obama.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I think the good news about that is I don't know if anybody cares about Michelle Obama's podcast. I mean, there's a reason that they didn't re up with Spotify at the time. Meghan Markle, a lot of resources allocated there. It takes more than a name. And I think, when you talked about how podcast was dead a couple of years ago, right? I thought that was actually a good thing for our business and for our clients because there was a normalizing and a level setting on value. Whereas everybody just thought you turn on a podcast and you're going to be Joe Rogan and you're going to make $1 billion. Well, all these celebrities came in, and what they found out was, the publishers figured out, oh, we can't do minimum guarantees based on no data and no track record. And then the celebrities are like, why am I not making Joe Rogan money? I'm more famous than he was. And then they go, this is hard. I'm 100 episodes in. I've tapped all my friends to come do a chat with me, and it's not necessarily standing out, right? And so I think you actually saw a lot of famous people moving away from the medium. And I thought that was a good thing. It was a bit of a cleansing where people that wanted to press on past that were a lot more serious about the craft and willing to play the long game. Because, we've seen a lot of flash in the pan stuff, and it doesn't last if you're not really serious about it, if you're not committed, and if you're not genuine. I don't share that concern. I think that it's sort of like celebrities trying to get into an edgier situation and have a little bit of a street cred at the ground level. But I do think, but I am concerned about when distribution is aligned with talent and not aligned with other talent. Is it still possible for that other talent to make their way? I think there probably needs to be more time that we spend as an industry talking about independence and supporting the independents that are trying to come up in the world.
Yeah. So who at the bigger apps, who's controlling the editorial there? That's a big thing. I still think one of the best ways to get increased downloads on a podcast is if Apple throws you a kiss and puts you up there. How do we fight the perception is reality of the New York Times wrote Michelle Obama as a podcast? I'm a casual. That's what I read in the newspaper. I read online. That is the story. Meghan Markle has a podcast. That's the story. how do we look out for the little guy heading forward? I think it's a hard question I don't think we've ever solved. Going back to the beginning, just when it was a smaller room, it was a little easier to get to the top.
So at the end of the day, I mean, we've had a pretty robust conversation about it. At this moment in time, does the definition matter or not?
So I don't think it does, because whatever the civilians think is a podcast, that's what a podcast is, right? End of story. I can climb up on Old Man Mountain and yell RSS feed. Like it doesn't matter. Whatever they think is a podcast is a podcast. When we're going out to sell, whatever the buyer thinks is a podcast is a podcast. Along the way, let's not let audio podcasts become the equivalent of, I don't know, black and white TV or silent movies or something. Let's not give up our corner.
And our corner, particularly as you're thinking about it in terms of what the buying community thinks, do you believe it would be helpful to have some structure around that from a definition standpoint?
You mean defining what?
What is a podcast? Yeah. Do you not think brands need it?
I think it's going to come down to individual, who are the great sellers, who are the great buyers, and relationships. And if you get on the phone with somebody you've got a relationship with, you go, hey, I got a hot show. It's got the right demo. That's great. The out of school buyers are just going to go for numbers and how do I hit the demo that I've been assigned to? And I don't think, somebody 2 seconds out of college is going to care how they get to the numbers. Do we have relationships where like, hey, you're trying to sell golf clubs. I've got a golf show. It's this smaller thing. I think that could work, but I don't know at an industry level. I don't know if it would work as much as I would like it to.
Yeah. Well, I'm inclined to think that it does have value so that people know how to classify what they are purchasing. And I think, things like RSS, diversifying your distribution channels, it would be my counsel to somebody on the supply side, whether you're a creator or a publisher or whatever, to diversify your distribution and to make sure that you have audio only when the content will hold its value without the video. You can have the video, but the show has to work with your eyes closed to be a podcast. It's my view, and I'm hearing a consensus around that type of definition. So we'll see where the market leads. I guess the last thing I want to throw out as a bit of a challenge to you and let you react is this notion of people have been trying to kill the word since day one. Like it's well publicized public addresses and articles saying, can't we do away with this? As soon as the smartphone came and iPods became obsolete, you had an immediate logical argument that it's a ridiculous name to keep calling it. And yet there's been this passion, this rallying cry behind it, these communities that really believe in the essence of something that has been able to survive, and talking that crowd into calling it a simulcast, calling it a show, calling it a vodcast, a vlog, any of that. They don't seem to be doing it. And it was interesting to see Spotify back away from the word podcasting when they went to podcast for creators. And then YouTube comes in and goes, oh, we're in the podcast business and everybody listens to podcast. Right? So you can't get alignment. But I guess I would contend that the rebels won the revolution. They were successful. And this thing has been so branded into the culture that I don't think we're going to be able to displace it with another word, even if we wanted to.
I agree. This is Kleenex. This is Xerox. This is a podcast. I think where we're going to land is old school audio podcasting as a podcast. I think the term video podcasting will stick. I think civilians will come to think of as a video podcast as a podcast, as much as that makes me sad. And then somewhere in between is what we're doing right now, which I guess is quote unquote an audio first podcast, which those of us in the industry will use and understand, but I don't think the civilians will.
Well, it'll be like terrestrial radio, right?
Oh, can I tell you, I was there for that. I was at Sirius when we started terrestrial radio. We had the giggles. We couldn't believe we were getting away with that. We just said terrestrial radio a million times, and then the media went with it, which was the inspiration for the Substack I wrote about vodcasting. That was the exact inspiration. We kept saying terrestrial radio, and even better phrase, old-fashioned terrestrial radio, and the media went with it.
Yeah, so, I was working in terrestrial radio at that time.
You
Thank you very much.
Guys. We're commercial free.
You got us good.
Yeah, we're commercial free, and
it was funny. Cook, and all of a sudden we're ET.
Yeah. So now I'm on the other side of it, and the video podcasters are calling what I'm doing in the basement, old fashioned, old timey RSS audio only podcasting losers. How
Right.
2024 of you. And I guess we all live long enough to become the villain.
Well, so I think one of the things that I'm starting to believe just coming out of this conversation is that like I don't think podcasts are going to die in the foreseeable future. I think it's audio led. I think if there's a video component but it still works without the video, you can keep calling it a podcast. But the minute you're like Hot Ones or something where the visual component is really key to the content being as valuable, you don't want to take that with you. It's a kind of sit down and watch experience. Then I think video podcast works. And I think that you can shorthand that as vodcast if you want. But I think if you anchor on podcast, you bolt on the word video when the video is primary, and vodcasting is just a simple shorthand that some folks will resonate with and some won't, but at least there's a way that they can say it with less syllables. I think that's potentially a very viable path.
I agree. If we're at the Treaty of Paris here, I'll sign.
Well, we kind of are. So, any final thoughts? We're going to take this to the industry. We're putting out a white paper, we're putting out a series. And I'd like to believe that we're doing something for posterity. The people from the different corners of this ecosystem that have come in and contributed really is meaningful, including yourself. And so, anything else you would want to put on the record for what you believe the industry needs to do or hear to be sustainable and to keep having healthy growth?
Watch the budgets.
That's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. The top line can change, but you got to watch that. You got to watch those expenses. So I like that. And I think, people chase trends and then they get screwed, right? And
Yes.
You see that everywhere all the time, over and over and over. And I think if you can be disciplined and if you can have a strategy that survives, like, I guess one thing I keep thinking about is you've got all these people trying to gamify it, right? And I think you can, and I think if you're good enough at it, you can arbitrage this thing like a day trader or a performance marketer that's always optimizing their Facebook campaign and their Google search bids and all that. Like, you can do that, but most people aren't going to do that successfully. Right. And in the same way, you can program around where you think things are going. But we've all seen that every 90 days or so, somebody's getting the rug pulled out from under them. It's all musical chairs. And I think whatever strategy you do, hopefully it starts with passion, and hopefully it's about the content first. And whether or not video should be primary or just an incremental thing like what we're doing, hopefully it serves the content, because just because there's so much peer pressure to focus on video doesn't mean that's right for the story you're trying to tell and the information you're trying to share. And just to be thoughtful about that and disciplined enough to say, okay, I'm going to block out the noise. And if it happens to work for what I really care about doing here, I'll play the algorithm games. And if not, I'm just going to make the best show that I want to make and let the industry keep doing its dance. But you don't have to keep up with every move.
I talk a lot about resources. Resources obviously include money, but also includes humans, time, and headspace. So do you have all four of those? That's a big challenge. I know, like what we do at Caloroga, we're running lean and mean. It's Mark and I. That's the entire company. It's two
Wow.
guys pumping out these shows. But I'll be the first to tell you, I'm making fast food. I'm not making high art. Let's do a show down and dirty, get it out, throw some mid rolls in, make some coin next. And that's got to be part of the conversation of what are we making and what are the resources, and let's not underestimate time and headspace.
While you're here, can you give us just a little more information about Caloroga?
Sure. So we are focusing on short form. Our biggest show is one called Palace Intrigue. We talk about the British royal family. So Meghan Markle has been a gift to us. When I originally pitched that show, I thought it would be the lead up to when I started it. The Queen was 93, and I'm like, oh, there are some predictable events coming. Let's get in front of it. And we did that. And boy, Meghan, thank you, Meghan. We started one was my wife's idea, 5 good news stories. It's me telling you 5 news stories that aren't negative or political. It's just happy stuff, dogs
Wow.
being found, that kind of thing. That one does really well. Daily Comedy News is a passion project of mine that, I knock that out 7 days a week. And then we've got a bunch of shows along the way. We're also very open about using AI. We've got a show called 5 Daily Trivia Questions. The host is an AI. And some people throw pies in my general direction about that. And I look at it from a resource standpoint of the AI reads it really well, really quickly. I can put together weeks of shows in an hour and a half, and I didn't lay anybody off. The show wouldn't exist. I did not lay anyone off.
Question on that. Do you disclose to the audience that it's AI?
We do have, so James Cridlin has asked me about that. On the trivia show, absolutely at the end, it says that it's AI. He observed we had done a new show called White Smoke, which is about how papal successions take place. And an AI hosted that. And I know James has some thoughts about AI hosts, and he asked me why I didn't disclose it. And I explained to him, wasn't trying to hide it. For me, it's a tool. I use AI all day, every day. And I just didn't think about it in terms of, and he actually gave me a good line. I didn't hire a live band to do the open music. I just grabbed a music library, and then a very professional sounding read hosted the show. And does it sound right on your ears? I think it does. I think the White Smoke AI host sounds better than if I read it with this particular accent. But I didn't go out of my way to write, "Hi, I'm an AI." In later scripts, I've added that in. I'm not at all trying to hide it. In fact, we're proud of it. I brought it up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. My take on it, just from where we sit on behalf of the brands, is you should let them know. It doesn't mean you have to ruin the show with it. It doesn't mean you have to come out and go, "This is not real people," and then have somebody that sounds like a real person, right? But there's a way to do it so you're disclosing in an honest way. And I think the big thing is not to take the AI version of a person that you believe is a person or is truly a person, and that they're not voicing ads and making recommendations that the audience doesn't know they didn't actually do. And my fear is that when somebody gets busted doing that, it's going to be real bad for everybody. So it sounds like you're playing by those rules, and I think that's going to be the right long game.
So a couple of things there. My spidey sense is tingling loud about one notable personality that I suspect is AI reads. I'll let everyone else decide who I mean, but I hear it. In terms of would I have an AI do an endorsed read? Absolutely not. That's third
Right.
rail. What are you, crazy? Unless you as the buyer came to me and said, "Hey, we want to have fun with this," and it worked into the copy. Okay, then that's the buyer agreeing to it. But "Hi, I'm a robot and I'm telling you to drink this soda." That's third rail. Don't do that. We're just having somebody read copy or something read copy. See, I even used, so that's how my brain thinks. Like these AI hosts that I use, I'm writing for particular styles for them that I actually think of them as people that I work with remotely. I'm not really thinking them as a bot. And I think that you just heard me slip up and call them somebody. And I think that gets back to what I was getting into with James Cridlin, that I'm not trying to hide it. It's just the way I think. It's just like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
here's a voice, and I put out a show. But we're not trying to hide it. Proud of it.
Well, I think AI and its relationship to the medium is a future series that we probably need to go a little deeper into. But this has been really helpful for me. I think we're largely aligned in what we want to see here, and there may be some practical steps to get a little closer. So thank you, John, for being part of the Media Roundtable. I think we're largely aligned. Who listen. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road and Veritone One, where we want you to succeed in audio and use your influence for good. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by going to oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. That includes you, John, the influencer. It's free. It is not done by AI, although I'd like to increase that involvement if we can. If you have feedback for us on this program, we'd love to hear it. info@mediaroundtable.com. And if you're really serious about the business, you got to listen to our audio creative focused podcast called Ad Infinitum, hosted by Stu Redwine. It takes a village to make this thing happen. And we just want to say thank you again to John, to Haley, Ruby, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, Sean, and the team at Podcast One. And as always, influence responsibly. That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. Check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. You know, this show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.